Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 21st of May 2024. Thank you very much to JR who has done the mapping, legend. We're going to look at, first of all, well, if you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please look at the key on the screen at the moment, pause the video. We're going to look at a railway that has been constructed or is in the process of being constructed. Apparently there's only one part of that which is fully functional. Tim White asks, why has Ukraine let Russia almost complete a new railway in occupied Ukraine? Military spokesman Dmytro Potenchuk says only one section is working so far and it remains a legitimate target. The Crimean bridge is not used much for military traffic anymore. The new track links Russia to Crimea. So this new track is coming from, as far as I understand, Rostov-on-Don through Taganrog down the south here, and will aim to connect up existing railways with Russia through the south of Ukraine. It doesn't go through Crimea, so that if the Kerch Bridge gets taken out, or indeed because the Kerch Bridge cannot handle heavy traffic still now, this is the alternative. Now, I suppose you could argue that they are waiting for it to be finished before blowing it up, rather than have contractors readily available to fix whatever's destroyed. That could be a reason, but you would have thought it is certainly a legitimate target. But that is, at least somewhat functional at the moment somewhere along the line, and that is either worrying or it's inviting Ukraine to hit it. Right, we're going to go to the north after talking about that, to Kharkiv, where the Russians are still pushing, although not hugely, it seems. In fact, the claims are that they have had half as many attacks in the last 24 hours as the previous 24 hours, although one day this week, the Ukrainians claim there are 0 attacks, so I don't suppose you can go any further south than that. So the deep state maps here has some changes, saying clarified the advance in Vovchansk and clarified the advance in surrounding villages. So these aren't particularly new moves in the last 24 hours. It's just sort of clarifying what's already the case. When we go to look at there, remember there are 2 salients where the Russians are attacking, over here in the west and over here in the east. If we look at the west, there's this small extra salient near the village of Zelene that has either seen Ukrainians push back or as a rejig. There was an amount that looked something like that yesterday. The deep state map had indicated. Andrew Perpetua doesn't have the Russians here at all in control, and Surat Maps has pushed back the Russians. There was a larger control area, so this could be an area where the Ukrainians are putting up some decent resistance, as it appears the area of Lipsy. And the reason why is because, as was mentioned in a live stream last night, this is and previously indeed, this is the area that the Russians are able to get closest to Kharkiv. And if one of their intentions is to be able to hit Kharkiv with artillery and to just basically terrorize Kharkiv, then that's only sort of 20 odd kilometers away, which is within range of their artillery. If they have vaguely functioning artillery, there are some observations about the state of their barrels, and that's why their artillery is being brought closer and closer. But nonetheless, that's why Lipsy should be a place that they are going for. It depends what you think their intentions are. I still think that is one of their intentions, and that it's not to take Kharkiv, but possibly to operationally encircle it, or partially encircle it, in order to give it a bit of a hammering with artillery. But as you can see, Andrew Perpetua has a little bit of a gain for the Russians towards Lipsy, but that's only in line with what Surat Maps has already got. Deep State Maps a little bit further back, but a bit of argument as to exactly where the Russians are around here. Nonetheless, they have been pushing, but as mentioned, not nearly as much as we have seen previously. So I do have here, well, actually, we'll go first to Tim White that said about this. Ukrainian General Staff say that Russian attacks in Kharkiv region have halved in the last 24 hours. They report ongoing fighting in around Staritsya, Lipsy and Vovchansk. The situation is under control. Our soldiers have carried out a series of assaults and strengthened the defense there. Now, I read out War Gonzo, who is very much a Russian mill blogger operating, well, in a number of places around the front lines. He's now appearing to be up in the Kharkiv area. Wow, just 2 weeks ago, the Russians were shouting about the inevitability of taking Kharkiv. Today, the family Soyoma Pegov from Wargonzo talks about the potential possibility that defense forces of Ukraine will seize the initiative and launch a counterattack in the Kharkiv direction due to large losses of the occupiers and the advantage in artillery. I read this to you this morning. I won't fully read it again, just to give you the synopsis that the idea was that, we succeeded pretty well to begin with, but now the Ukrainians, he argues, outnumber us in artillery. We are suffering losses. They have FPV drones working really effectively, a number of battalions, the reserves brought in, artillery, so on and so forth. So he says, due to massive artillery fire and the saturation of front with enemy FPV drones, which we recall, according to the estimates of many military commanders, are playing in this war, if not a determining role, then at least a very close one to it. So, they are being incredibly effective, is the claim there. Numerical superiority, manpower, artillery, drones. The Russians are, he says, now suffering somewhat. So, it said there's problematic issues in the Lipsy region where our troops are deeply wedged into the enemy territory and have formed a kind of ledge similar to Torsk and Vremsky. So to sum it up, our successes are very glorious. So they were succeeding at the beginning, but engaging in dangerous auto-training in the spirit of the enemy is running, and our hills are shining. Tomorrow we will be near Kharkiv, maybe fraught with danger for ourselves. In other words, don't say that this is a shining success type thing. We are now, we are in a bit of trouble, or at least it's not as successful as we had started out, as it started out being, and we are taking losses. The Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, says of this area, I haven't popped into the ISW for quite a long time now, but I thought today would be a good time to get back to it. The claim is here, Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces advanced 200 to 400 meters near Lipsy, although we've not seen any claims of that, and seized the dacha north of Lipsy. A Russian source claimed that Russian forces also advanced near Zeleny. So these are the claims that there are some advances here and some advances over there. I guess that's going to be... So the Institute for the Study of War releases their report my time in the evening, late evening, into the night time, sort of sometimes around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock my time. So that would have come out last night referring to the day before, and sometimes they refer to even previous days as they're compiling evidence as they go. So that may have been a previous claim that may not be true as to what is taking place over the last 24 hours, but gives us some sense of kind of what the claims are. It goes on to say Russian sources claimed that the Russian military operating in the Vovchansk direction complained about how the area's open terrain does not allow for Russian ammunition supplies to arrive quickly at this front line, likely referring to the fact that Russian ground lines of communication, or GLOCs, across open terrain are vulnerable to Ukrainian interdiction strikes. So this, it might also be worth mentioning that around here, the Russians are using apparently a lot of golf carts and Bukankas loads to deliver their ammunition and supplies, and these are getting hit. Obviously, they're not very well armored, but the question is, why are they using those rather than other vehicles? Is it because they are better for that kind of job, or is it because they don't have the optimal vehicles that they would like to otherwise use? So Vovchansk itself is a town that is suffering. It's getting flattened by both sides. So Russia are hitting it with guided glide bombs and artillery. Ukraine are hitting it with guided glide bombs and artillery. So the place is getting absolutely hammered. There is evidence here that the Russians are using their 1,500 kilogram UMPK glide bomb, so the carb bomb there, and that is at a building at this location. We'll just geolocate this, give you a sense of where, therefore, the Ukrainians are for them to be hitting that. And that's, within the Ukrainian control zone. So let's see that building again as it is hit. Oops, there we go. So, that's that grey top building. And, you can see it gets quite a hammering there. So, both sides are using these there were claims that the Ukrainians were either using GLSDB or guided glide bombs. People not quite sure. They look fairly sizable, whatever it is that Ukrainians are using, as the hospital was hit previously, where the Kadyrovites apparently were holding out. So, activity up there. But like I go back to say, I'm not sure this was the greatest use of the Russian troops. It may seem like they do get an advantage from doing this, but it's comparatively weaker, I think, than it would have been had they used those troops elsewhere. But I guess we might never know that, because it's a kind of a counterfactual that we can't see without an alternative universe. So then we come down to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea and the Tabaivka area, where the Russians have made some further... Oh no, it's not Tabaivka, which is further to the north. That's up there, Krokmalna. This is actually near Stelmakivka, which was active about a week and a half ago. It seemed to quieten down, and now a couple of mappers here, Deep State Maps and Andrew Perpetua, have the Russians making some advances to the west of Kolomyachika, moving towards Stelmakivka there. No other movement, or at least no other exchanges of territory on that front line. Just seeing if, then we're going to come down to this area just south of the salient that is towards Terny and Torska. On the way to Torska here, just out of coming out of the Serebyansky forest to the west of Crimea, we have the Russians making some gains there, partially in the forest there. Surat Maps says, this is according to Surat Maps, that the Russian army started advances west of Dobrova, taking control over a series of positions the Ukrainian army had in the forest area close to Kreminska electrical substation. So, that looks fairly substantial land, by the way. If Surat Maps is correct, that's a pretty decent advance. The other mappers don't have that at the moment. No clarification as to what's going on in Bilahorivka, because the mappers disagree quite a lot about who controls much of the land to the east of that sector. Coming past Siversk, no change there. And Chaziv Yar, no change. I mean, just incredible that this is supposedly one of their main sectors of, one of their main goals is Chaziv Yar. We had a big talk about this last night in the live stream, Greg and myself, and I don't know whether they pivoted away from Chaziv Yar because, and Greg I think was right in saying this, I'm of course going to agree with this, because my opinion is the Russians are going to struggle to do any major territorial gains unless they mobilize 500,000 people. You've got 50,000 people. They've decided to put them 30,000 or so up around Kharkiv, and maybe 10,000 or so around Sumy, and some possibly further to the northwest there. Okay, so that's your choice. You've done that. You could put 50,000 and you could put them in Chaziv Yar, and you would take Chaziv Yar. I think that would expedite the falling of Chaziv Yar, but that wouldn't be enough to take Kramatorsk, I don't think. It wouldn't be enough to take Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka. Like, if you want to take all of those, you need hundreds of thousands of troops. This is a really big... The Ukrainians have dug in well here. This is a major supply area for their front line. There are gas deposits around here. There's some natural resources the Russians would really like, the Ukrainians would like to keep hold of. This is an important area that the Russians would struggle to take. So even with 50,000 troops from the Kharkiv attack, they would take Chaziv Yar but struggle to go any further. So you're wondering, what is their overall objective in this whole war at the moment? I just don't know, because if they want anything significant like the Donbass, which would require them taking the rest of Luhansk up there, which is somewhat doable, and then Donetsk, which is not really doable, they would need 500,000 troops. I think they just need a ton of troops to successfully do that. And of course, if you're going to do a mass national mobilization, that will cause all sorts of problems with it being deeply unpopular, and it will screw your economy even more than it already is. And so I think they've erred away from doing that and tried to pick up those people from abroad, from prisons, and from migrants and whatnot. And they've had some success in doing that, very successful in getting convicts, but They don't necessarily make the best well-trained troops, and they have been attrited away. And so they're back to a stage where they now need more troops. What do? What is your intention? Or do you really envisage taking the Donbass? Or is it, as Greg was talking about, pivoting away from maybe Chasiv Yar and that semicircle of cities and say taking Kharkiv, which is quite important for this general area. I mean, it's not, we talk about it being like really key. It's key only up to a point, right? Because once you pass there, obviously it's no longer important, but it gives you, it's kind of key to this kind of area there. But it's not the end of the world. Pokrovsk, I would say, would be more important still, because as you can see, that's, giving supplies up to Konstantinivka, down to the front line of Avdiivka, and also down south towards Kharkiv itself. But again, how many troops would it take the Russians to dislodge the Ukrainians from their slightly better fortifications that one thinks that they're building around here, that they've built east of Pokrovsk? And that's a fairly major town, this, or city, and other, the conurbation around there. Again, you're going to need a lot of troops to do that, a lot of mechanized equipment, a lot of artillery. Do you have that? You've committed 50,000 of that to Kharkiv. Was that the most sensible thing to do, etc., etc.? So yeah, really interesting, just trying to work out what the Russians still intend to do, short of, and if they don't do that mobilization, then this is what they've got. They can just keep on crawling on, but with each passing week, you would think the Ukrainians will be in a stronger and stronger position with regard to weapons being delivered from the West, building up their own industrial military complex, although that does depend on energy consistency from their network that's been hammered, and also mobilization. We've just heard today that, was it 3,000 convicts have agreed to volunteer for the armed forces? So there's possibly 3,000 that they've already got. And that they are gathering momentum with their mobilization. So, it's strike now while the iron is hot, but without massive mobilization, it's difficult to know where you're going with that. Right, a couple of claims from the Institute for the Study of War that talk about Chasiv Yar, coming all the way down here. Geolocated footage published on the 18th, so this is going back 3 days, indicates that's what it talked about with the ISW. Report is from last night, usually from when I do these videos, but sometimes referring back, here it talks 17th and 18th, so that's 3 or 4 days previously. Geolocated footage published on the 18th, and that's published as well, so it doesn't mean it actually happened on the 18th, indicates that Russian forces recently advanced during mechanized assaults on the 17th and 18th of May in the southern part of the Canal microdistrict. So we'll have a look at that. And geolocated footage published on the 19th indicates that Russian forces recently advanced in southern Klishchivka, which we talked about yesterday. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces completely seized Klishchivka, although the ISW has not observed evidence for that. So the two areas we're going to look at in the Bakhmut general direction are here, the Canal micro-district. So you've got the canal coming down here. You've got Chasiv Yar, and you have the Canal micro-district that the Russians are moving along, and they've actually started getting into the initial streets of that, as according to Soviet maps. They're working their way north through Bodanivka, that seems to be under their control, and they're now in Kalinina, and south along the road through Ivanivska. So that's where we're going to go first. And the claim is active hostilities in the Bakhmut direction, attack by the Russian armed forces by several armoured vehicles and motorised rifle units of the Novy micro-district under fire from the armed forces of Ukraine. Landing troops in multi-storey buildings, defeat of armoured vehicles of the Russian armed forces, counter-attack of the armed forces of Ukraine. The advance of the Russians is more than a kilometre. So there is a counter-attack. So how did that counter-attack go? Did it flush the Russians out of these positions? So this appears to be the positions the Russians were in, landing. Yep, so landing in, or that could be where some of the vehicles were. That's not the buildings that they're dropping in. Let's have a look at this set of coordinates and plug that in. So there we have, and that's that's all the way back there. So I think that's really where the Russians are. The other one might be where the Ukrainians were or I'm not 100% sure without going to Telegram to properly check that. So that would fit into the Russians attacking up to him, which is why Andrew Perpetua has this as grey zone. So his Russian defensive line's way back there, grey zone up here with the Ukrainians behind there. But this initial area is grey zone because the Russians had attacked there. But of course, as we know with Surat maps, as soon as Russians attack somewhere, they then control it. That's what he thinks. And so has this area controlled by the Russians. And that probably explains the difference. But they were, as at least according to this, the Ukrainians did commit to counterattacking there. And then the claim is that all of Klishchiivka is under control of the Russians. Well, not even Surat Maps claims that at the moment. However, the key is up here in the trench lines on the hills behind Klishchiivka. So Klishchiivka sits on the low ground. It's all rubberized. There's absolutely no shelter here, protection. Very few basements will still be able to be used effectively, but here we have active hostilities on the southern flank of Bakhmut, attack by the Russians, infantry unit in the southern part of Klishchiivka, assault on the position of the armed forces of Ukraine. The advance of the Russian forces is more than 1.5 kilometers, so this is to accept that the Russians have advanced fairly considerably in the Klishchiivka area, and this appears to be not liking that. Not unusual there. And yeah, so wow. Okay, so that is interesting. That is definitely further back than any of the mappers have at the moment. And that would suggest that the Russians, if they have not been repelled from there, then they might well have taken all of Klishchiivka, or at least that could just be grey zone. So yeah, the advance of the Russian forces more than 1.5 kilometers, attack their assault on the position. Doesn't say that they have taken it though, so it could be why there's been no change. But that's to say the Ukrainians are there, but the Russians are also attacking them there. So interesting. We'll see what happens in that neck of the woods over the next couple of days. Coming down south from there, we come to Avdiivka here, where there's no change to that northern area, which is good news for the Ukrainians. Arkhangelska onto Novoalexandriivka there, towards that road that comes up from Pokrovsk. I forget what road it is. Yes. Anyway, that road. And then they are making some gains in the Netalove area. Some saying that they control now all of Netalove. A bit of mapping difference between the mappers in that area. We go to the Institute for the Study of War. Geolocated footage published on the 18th indicates that Russian forces recently advanced in western Netalove. And we'll have a look at that now. So Surat Map saying that the Russians have taken control over the last parts of Netalove. The battle for the locality is over. That's their claim. And then the geolocation from the ISW's report says positional combat operations in the southern flank of Avdiivka. The Russian armed forces have managed to advance up to 500 meters in Netalove residential area in a westerly direction. The advanced positions of the Russian armed forces on the western outskirts of Netalove are under fire from a drone of the armed forces of Ukraine. So this is to say that the Russians are here on the western outskirts of Netalove, which means that they probably, since they are being hit by Ukrainian drones, that means they probably are in control of that, but they are getting hammered by drones. Nothing unusual for pretty much anywhere on the battlefield, really, on the front. So, yep, I would possibly agree with what Surat Maps has there for an advance. Might see that getting caught up with by the other mappers as time goes on. We come down to Krasnohorivka. Andrew Perpetua has a little bit of an advance for the Russians in no, not Krasnohorivka. Sorry, in almost in Herivka, the outskirts of that, as Mariinka turns into Herivka. So yeah, Russians both sides of that water feature moving on. In fact, we have here. I think this is Krasnohorivka. I better pause that. I think this is a geolocation from the Institute for the Study of War. Russian mill bloggers claim that... No, this is back up in northern... here we go. It's geolocated footage published on May the 20th indicates that Russian forces advanced southeast of Krasnohorivka. But that is, yes, southeast of Krasnohorivka. It could be up here, or it could be down in this area on the way to Horivka. We shall see where this is. So another Russian BMP was destroyed, totally exploded. The Cossacks with the 100th Assault Brigade did a very good job with the drones. The enemy BMP was completely burned. It has become a little warmer in the soul. And that is geolocated to this position in Krasnohorivka. We'll plug that in. But again, this is a piece of mechanized equipment. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Russians will control that land that it's on, just that it's driving there as it gets blown up by a drone. So that's right in Krasnohorivka, really, or sort of right in the Russian-controlled area as it comes into Krasnohorivka major. So yeah, nothing surprising about that. All the mappers agree that that's under Russian control, so you expect there to be vehicles driving about in that area, and for those to be in range of drones that are very active in the region. So that is the situation there. Just some small gains for the Russians to be talked about in both Horivka and here. It's a little bit northwest of Novomykhailivka. A field that they have taken just north of the town there. And then we come on to the southern front line, where you can see no change to the Velika Novosilka sector, and some change here to the Robotina area. So we look at what some of the claims are concerning Robotina. Remember when I was telling you, says Estrai Intel, that Robotina was entirely a grey zone? Well, that's no longer the case. Ukrainian forces have once again returned to their positions on the northern part of the settlement, bringing about a quarter of its territory back into direct control. So this is interesting. We've had the Russians say that they completely have taken Robotina, that they control the village, which is rubble. Now we have a claim from a Ukrainian source saying actually the Ukrainians have retaken a quarter of the village. As for the Russians, no, they are simply not present in Robotina. Sometimes they try to sneak in and hide in basements, but they have not been successful in establishing positions. In fact, Ukrainian artillery and drones have the territory all the way to the approaches of Novoprokopivka under fire control. This is really quite a big claim, because it's certainly counter to what Surat Maps is claiming here, which is that the Russians now have control of all of Robotina, right? So the claim from Estrai Intel is that the Ukrainians now control about a quarter of it, and they are there in situ, rather than it just being grey area and not under control of the Russians, and that they have fire control over the Russians all the way back to Novoprokopivka, which you probably do to some extent. Like, no matter what's happening, there will be drones flying all over this place, and yeah, I think it's probably trivially true that they do have that. Whether you call it fire control, I don't know. How accurate this is concerning Robotina, I don't know from Estrai Intel. Surat Maps here saying that that, as you can see from the map there, that over the last 5 days, so this is a long-term outlook, the Russian army secured new parts of Robotina. The urban area of the locality is under full Russian control, which is in line with what the Russian MOD have said, but not 100% sure that's true. 65th drone indicating Russians managed to capture a bunker in the northernmost part of Robotina. So this is a bunker they captured, which meant the Ukrainians were there for them to capture it from the Ukrainians. One presumes there would have been Ukrainian soldiers in situ. Now, this is northernmost, so this would then go against what Estrai Intel is saying and supports what Surat Maps has as their claim that the Russians control pretty much all of Robotina. So that is right on the northernmost edge of the village. So could well expect, since that geolocation came from Gik, who's part of Andrew Perpetua's team, you can imagine that might then lead into some mapping changes for Andrew Perpetua. As you can see here, That's in Andrew's grey zone at the moment. He has control very much further to the south of Robotina. It could be that you might see all of this go red in the next mapping update. But it's always difficult to tell. So when you go back to someone like Istria Intel, this could be based on, that's going back to last night. But again, it could have been Intel that was 24 hours old. So you have these conflicting things because you're not quite sure when people get information and what the most recent thing is, and then there are counterattacks. So it can be that all these contradictory claims can be at once true, just depending on when they're referring to exactly. So it becomes a bit of a hot mess, which is why I try and synthesize, or JR tries to synthesize all these mappers to give you a sense of all the chaos and say, it's pretty chaotic. There are lots of claims about what's going on here that you can make up your own mind as what you think is accurate. Just to remind you about this second blue line, so I can turn that off, and sometimes I do. That denotes the contested areas, so the grey zone. So in this case, the line to the most northernmost line here is so if I turn that off, you'll see that blue line disappears. That denotes the grey zone. So this is Andrew Perpetua's defensive line for the Russians. As I just showed you, he only has them in that very southern part there, as we saw on this map. So that his red area there is exactly what we have on the map here, right? So that just tracks exactly, because it is taken from Andrew Perpetua's data. And then we add in his, but only his, Ukrainian defensive line. And thus it shows you the grey zone in between. So this second, unfortunately, we couldn't make it another colour. It has to be blue. But this tells you, there's a few errant lines there that will be coming from his data set. But if you look here, it tells you that, that he has the Ukrainians controlling this area, sitting in trench lines back here and in tree lines. This area is where there might be attacks either way, and then the Russians sitting back here and having their own dugouts and whatnot back there. They control this area. Ukrainians control this area, and that is kind of no man's land that sees a lot of activity. And as you can see from Robotina, then that translates into this whole village being a grey zone, according to Andrew Perpetua. But as mentioned, that may well change in his next mapping update. And then we come on to Kharkiv, and I'm going to turn it off here because it's a bit weird. The data for contested areas is done on an island by island basis here, so it makes it a bit like there's too many lines there. So we're going to look at Potemkin Island here. We're going to go to the ISW that talks. I didn't mention that. Not to worry. We've gone through that. Actually, let's go back to Robotina for this claim here. So we have Russian forces. Positional engagements continue near Robotina and northwest of Lvov. A Russian mail blogger claimed that Russian forces use artillery more intensely than Ukrainian forces. Well, not surprising there. But that Ukrainian forces use first-person view drones more intensely than Russian forces in the Zaporizhia direction. Interesting, and that fits in with the data that we are getting through the Tochny guys. In fact, I might reach out to Daniel and see if he wants to do another video on that, because he's got some new data and analysis out. Then we're going to go to Veliky Potemkin Island, which is this island here that has the Russians controlling the southernmost part of the island, and the claim from the ISW is that geolocated footage published on the 19th indicates that Russian forces recently advanced in the southern part of that island. Let's see what the geolocation is. So the Ukrainian 123rd Brigade have FPVs burning 2 Russian positions in Bilorodova in Kherson Oblast. So, okay, we have a Russian position getting taken out here by Ukrainian FPV drones. We don't want the timestamp there. And that is, so slightly further north. That's across that river that had previously been the edge of the Russian control zone. So they're pushing into that grey zone as according to that geolocation. And we go to the second one. So this is another Russian position being hit by an FPV drone, and I assume it's going to be in that same area of buildings just to the north of that Prochny River, which is part of the Dnipro River Delta there. So the Russians trying to get a foothold further to north of that island. We'll see what the Ukrainian response is. That's what you'd expect here, I guess, although it's pretty risky, obviously, trying to get across that river, as we have seen for the Ukrainians in the Kharkiv area, both along the main Dnipro River, but also the Konka River, this smaller river that you can see here, just north of Kharkiv. It'd be interesting to see what happens with the Kharkiv. It could well be that, so there have been two completely opposite claims. Russians have claimed to have taken the whole of Kharkiv. That's not been evidenced yet. The Ukrainians have claimed to have expanded the bridgehead there, but there are also rumours about whether Ukrainians are pulling out there to reconstitute elsewhere. So we'll see what happens with Kharkiv. My view is that this has been very useful for the Ukrainians in terms of attriting the Russians, but also they don't need to have huge amounts of troops this side to fix the Russians in position. But once you lose that, it becomes much harder to take again than once you have control of some of it. So if they do pull out of here, it means that they really do need to pull out there, because I think they're giving up a useful foothold on the other side of the river. Right, that's that for today's update. Thanks again to JR. Hopefully that was of use and interesting for you. Let me know what you think about all that's going on. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.